Hi everybody, thank you for joining me today, unless you're BMET students and you had no choice. So just to put this in context, we are in week 5 of lockdown. So I asked myself the question, what do people need in these strange and troubling times? And I answered to myself, they need a manual Kant. They need some stability and some reason and some certainty, and that's what Kant is going to give us. So a couple of people have asked for this anyway. And for BMET students, you have to watch this to answer your questions that I am setting in. So if you're following the AQA specification, then the chances are that you've done Immanuel Kant following on from utilitarianism. So if we just pick up on two of the key issues with utilitarianism, we had the problems with calculation, so the speed at which you're supposed to apply this utility calculus, and the uncertainty of the consequences. So however hard you calculate, you might end up with a consequence that is not what you expected. If utility is not maximised, you've then performed a wrong act. We have the tyranny of the majority, where there's a lack of individual liberties and rights. So if it was the case that to scapegoat a particular individual, to punish the innocent in order to save the suffering of many, then that individual has no intrinsic right to freedom. The individual has no intrinsic right to life, for example, if harvesting their organs was to increase utility. And it's by saving 5 other people. And we also have this idea that there's no consideration of intentions. So if you really do something with a good intention and yet the consequence doesn't maximise utility, then there's no consideration of that intention. It is just a wrong act. So picking up from that, Immanuel Kant is going to make morality a matter of reason. This is not something that is about what you want. It is not something about maximising good. It is just about pure reason. And it's an a priori process. You don't have to get out there and start assessing consequences. It is just pure a priori. You can think and use reason to determine what the right act is, which gives you that certainty and that stability and that lack of contingency that we may have found in other theories. So it's a deontological theory. So deontology is about duty, not about maximising good, not about how you feel. It's about duty. So you're going to end up with potentially a set of rules that you always follow. So what does Kant think about us? Kant sees us as imperfect rational beings. So animals are not rational. Animals have these desires and they don't think about those desires. They don't override those desires. They're just like, okay, I want to eat that food. I will eat that food. There's no question of, overriding that desire to eat the food. They're just going to do it. For us, we still have those desires, but because we're rational, we have the ability to overcome them. So I might say, I really want to eat that bag of M&Ms, but I know it's my colleague's bag of M&Ms. So I override that desire through reason, because I know I shouldn't steal, and I don't eat the bag of M&Ms. Okay, so that is one way in which we can override our desires. We're imperfect because we still have those desires, and we'd often desire to do wrong. Whereas if you take God, God is perfect and rational because he has no erroneous desires to overcome. He doesn't want to eat the M&Ms. So that's where he sees us. So for Kant, he does place the emphasis on the intention of the act, but for him, there is only one good motive, and that is the goodwill. This goodwill is the fact that you have reasoned out what is your duty and then you perform it. Any other motive can lead you into doing the wrong thing. No other motive is pure. So if I, for example, help somebody because it makes me feel good, that's not a pure motive. If I help somebody because I feel guilty, if I don't do it, that's not a pure motive. The only pure, uncontaminated motive is that I have done this out of duty. And that's the only thing that matters. And then it's the only thing that is good without qualification. So other goods, for example, you might think, intelligence is good, but it can be used to do unkind, cruel things. You might think that maximising happiness is good, but that doesn't always seem to result in what we feel is moral, as we've seen with utilitarianism. So he sees this idea of the goodwill as the only rational and pure motive. So an act has to be performed out of goodwill to be right. So there's a difference between acting out of duty and acting in accordance with duty. So if you act out of duty, then reason and duty and goodwill was your motive, and the act is a result of that. If you act in accordance with duty, it may be that you're performing the same act but not for the same reason, and that is not morally praiseworthy. The only thing that is morally praiseworthy is acting out of a goodwill. So Kant uses the example of the honest shopkeeper. So if you have a shopkeeper who keeps his prices low because he knows that it is his duty to do so, he's reasoned this out, he's acting out of duty. That's his motive for doing that act. And if you have another shopkeeper who also keeps his prices low, but does it because he wants people to keep coming back to the shop, he doesn't want to lose customers, he wants to look good in the community, it's the same act, but it's not morally praiseworthy. It's in accordance with duty because it's the same act as the dutiful act, but it's not out of duty. I have a really weird way of thinking about this. I think about two plants. And if you think about two plants, two flowers, say, then the flowers might look the same. But if you've got one that has grown out of good soil and one that has grown out of soil without nutrients, soil that's like really rubbish, then although they look the same, they're not. One is good and the other isn't. So although two flowers, two acts might look the same, it depends what do they come out of? What was their source? Was it duty? Was it a goodwill? Or was it something else? Even if that might seem like it's acting altruistically, if you're I'm acting out of love, I'm acting out of compassion. Remember that we are imperfect, rational beings. He doesn't rate our desires. Our desires are actually things that we should overcome. So you may well, have experienced the fact that love might make you do stupid things. Compassion might make you do something that isn't actually best for the person. So we can't trust those feelings. Kant doesn't like our emotions. We need to override them. They're dangerous. Rein them in with a bit of reason, and that's the only way you're going to do the right thing. So we've already said that for Kant, morality is a matter of reason, and it's not a choice. So for Kant, morality is a hypothetical. No, it's not. For Kant, morality is a categorical imperative. Imperative is where you must do something. Categorical is where it applies in every situation. There's no choice about it. It's just always the case. So we have to contrast categorical imperative with hypothetical imperative. So a hypothetical imperative tells you what you must do if you want to reach a certain end. So if I say you must study, then what I'm actually saying is you must study if you want to pass your exams. If I say you must eat healthily and exercise, what I'm actually saying is you must eat healthily and exercise if you want to stay healthy. But if you don't desire those ends, if you don't want to pass your exams, if you don't want to stay healthy, then those imperatives don't apply to you. They're if imperatives. Morality is not like that. Morality is not about what you want. Morality is just categorical. It's regardless of ends, it's regardless of desires, it's regardless of emotion. So what we then have to do is we have to look at what your duty is, and to find that out, Kant proposes the categorical imperative. There are actually three versions. I'm sticking to the AQA philosophy specs, so I'm only going to consider two. The first one being you take a maxim, which is a principle of action. So it might be that I'm about to steal something I can't afford, or I'm about to tell a lie to my lecturer to get out of the fact that I haven't done this homework I'm supposed to do. So you take that maxim, and Kant says in this first version of the categorical imperative, act only on that maxim that you can at the same time will to be a universal law. So the really sort of crude way of putting it is, what would happen if everybody did this? So the act that I'm about to do, the act that I'm testing against the categorical imperative, can I will that everybody did this? Now, there's two ways to fail that first version of the categorical imperative. The first is if the universalisation of that maxim is a contradiction in conception. I can't actually conceive of this world at all. So let's take the example of telling a lie. I'm about to tell a lie to somebody to get out of trouble. Can I imagine a world where everybody lied? Can I conceive of that world? well, actually, no, I can't conceive of that world, because if everybody lied, there'd be no concept of truth. If there's no concept of truth and falsity, I can't lie. So it actually becomes self-contradictory. Now, if a maxim is self-contradictory, it's a contradiction in conception, to universalise it, that's a logical impossibility, then it actually becomes your perfect duty not to do that. And a perfect duty is your duty that applies in all situations. So you can always not lie. There's no situation where, you can't not lie. So it's a perfect duty. If it's not a contradiction in conception, you have to then consider, is it a contradiction in will? So let's take the example, I will not help anybody else in need. Can I envisage that world? Can I conceive of that world? Yes, I can conceive of a world where nobody helped anybody else in need. It's not a contradiction in conception. So the next thing I have to ask is it a contradiction in will? Now, the question there is, well, would a rational person will this to be the case? Would they will this to be universalised? So would I will a world where nobody else helped anybody else in need, where nobody helped anybody? Well, no. As a rational being, I know that there are going to be cases where I need people to help me achieve my ends. I'm going to need help. So it would be irrational for me to will that world, even though it is a possibility. It would be irrational for me to will it. So it fails that categorical imperative, the first version. And if it's a contradiction in will, it's an imperfect duty. It's still your duty to help others who need it. It's still your duty to help people in need. But you can't necessarily perform that at all times. So there are times when perhaps, I'm asleep, I'm not helping people in need. There are certain big chunks of my day where I'm not helping anybody, but it's still my duty to help those in need. Okay, so that's kind of a crude, reasonably crude way of explaining the first version. So the second version of the categorical imperative is sometimes known as the humanity principle. So when you act, you always have to act and treat all humanity, whether in your own person or anybody else, never merely as a means, but always at the same time as an ends. So let's have a look at this idea of being an end in yourself. Human beings are ends in themselves. They don't exist as a means to an end. So if I look at the value of, I'm looking for something, I've got a lip balm. So if I look at the value of this, then it's a means to an end. Its value is in the fact that it does a particular job. If it didn't do that, I'm using it. I'm using it to do something. It doesn't have any intrinsic value. No, when it stops working, then it doesn't have any worth of its own. It has no ends of its own. It's got no goals in life, this lip balm. It doesn't want to achieve anything. It doesn't have autonomy. It doesn't have freedom of choice. So it exists purely as a means to an end. Now, human beings are not like that. Human beings are autonomous. Human beings have freedom. They have dignity. They have these intrinsic rights that cannot be infringed. Remember what we said about utilitarianism, that there were no intrinsic rights? Kant gives you that back. Kant gives you this idea of, intrinsic dignity, worth, and autonomy. Now, that word merely or solely is important. You don't treat other people merely as a means to an end. There are times when you treat people as a means to an end. You treat your bus driver as a means to achieving your particular end of getting where you want to go. You treat the shopkeeper as a means to an end. But equally, that's not their only purpose in life. They have ends of their own. They are autonomous. So if you take, for example, again, let's take lying to somebody again, then if you lie to somebody, you take away their dignity, you take away their autonomy and their freedom to choose. I use them as a means to an end. Same as if I steal from them, I am using them as a means to an end. And that is not allowed under Kantian Deontology. Okay, we have this intrinsic worth that cannot be infringed. So if you look at this idea of, the autonomy, the dignity, the certainty, there is a certain appeal to Kantian Deontology. And also this idea that morality should be internal, not external. You should be doing something or not doing something because of your rationality, because you are your own means of control. You are your own judge, not that somebody else is telling you to do it. Okay, so that again is quite appealing. So Kant wrote this pamphlet thing called On the Supposed Right to Lie from Altruistic Motives. And in this, he said that the idea of lying to save a life, he uses the example of somebody coming to his door with an axe, or somebody's door with an axe, and asking if a friend is in the house. You cannot lie. Now, what the utilitarian would say is you should lie for an altruistic motive. And he picks up on the point that if you were to lie, then what may happen is you say, oh no, my friend's not here. So your friend actually escapes out the back door, the murderer runs around the back, meets your friend, kills them, you are responsible. You are not responsible for what the murderer does, but you are responsible for you, and you lied. So therefore, you cannot know the consequences. So this idea of using consequences as a reason doesn't work. Okay, yeah, be careful with that, because sometimes people use the axe murder example against Kant without acknowledging that Kant actually did it, and it was his idea. So just be careful of that. Okay, so I'm running out of time on my phone, so I'm going to stop it there. I'm going to do issues in a separate video at some point. So yeah, hopefully that was useful, and I will be putting something else up very soon. Stay safe, wash your hands, and I will be in touch. Bye!